Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm your host for this week's show, Gene Barr. Well, today, all things politics 2025 and a little bit of 2026, and we'll start that when we return.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Well, today our guests are Chris Nichols, who is the CEO, president, what do you call yourself these days?
Chief Poobah.
Chief, whatever you want to do, of Eagle Consulting, and JJ Abbott with Commonwealth Communications. You're the owner of Commonwealth, I assume?
Executive Director.
Executive Director, there we go. So each of you in the past have, of course, worked on a lot of campaigns, occupied, and typically, Chris, you would represent the R viewpoint. JJ, you would do the Democrat viewpoint. You were on our inspector staff for many years, I know, and of course you served as communications director for former Governor Tom Wolf. Did I get all that right?
You did.
Perfect.
Good
I
job.
love it. Okay, good. So, Chris, you were on here back some number of months, and we talked a little bit about how the Republicans have narrowed what has traditionally been, in many cases, a fairly wide gap in registrations here in Pennsylvania. But what happened in the November elections, that narrowed gap didn't seem to get reflected in the results. So, JJ, let me turn to you. What was the reason that gap closed, and why didn't that reflect better for Republicans in November?
Well, I think it had to do with the environment. I think you had a favorable environment for Democrats. Their base of voters was just more motivated. And then ultimately, I think particularly with the statewide elections, you had independents that largely went either with a Democratic judge or voting yes for retention. But I will say, I think this is a major issue for the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, and it's a twofold one that they have to tackle. The registration gap that's narrowing. I think, they have twofold problem. They have a brand problem, which they need to be able to convince people to join their party. And they have an organizational problem. And I think the new chair, Eugene D. Pasquale, is focused on that. He's talking a lot about trying to fix that problem. And so, but they can't rely on registration alone anymore to win these elections. And luckily in 2025, they were able to swing a lot of voters to their side and have some pretty big wins, not just at the statewide level, but also at the local level.
Okay. So, Chris, from the Republican side, what should Republicans take out of November's election?
In odd years, it's about turnout, right? You're going to have less than half the people vote in 25 that voted in 24. The turnout kind of goes like this. Our two parties' coalitions are changing. In the past, it was Republicans who were the more reliable odd-year voters. And as the coalitions within the parties have changed, now those higher income, higher educated voters are more with the Democrats. So they have an easier time of getting their people out in odd years. We've seen it with President Trump. The party does markedly better when he's literally on the ballot than when he is not. And ultimately, the first year of Trump Part 2 was just as bad as the first year of Trump Part 1. 2017 was not a good year for my side, nor was 2025. What I will remind people, though, is at the end of 24, Republicans won every statewide seat there was. End of 25, the Democrats won every statewide seat there was. You would not have predicted a Democratic sweep in the days after, Trump got reelected and Dave McCormick, et cetera. So there's a pendulum in politics. It swings. It's undefeated. So we don't know what 2026 will bring.
Yeah. So I assume that the Democrats, if you're speaking for them, would say, yeah, this is a result of people turning from Donald Trump.
I think that's part of it for sure. We saw a pretty sizable drop in the president's approval rating really in the last 3 to 4 months in the run-up to the election. He had sort of a little bit of a honeymoon period where people were sticking with him, and now we're seeing the kind of going back to where we were towards the end of 2017. And so I think that played a factor. I do think as well, when you look at how the campaign played out, the Democratic side, particularly the yes side for the retention, really steamrolled all the way through to the end. Republicans on the no side kind of lost that momentum. Okay. They sort of dropped out a little bit towards the end, and that actually helped create a lot of, I think, momentum at the local level, where we saw a lot of county and local seats that ended up kind of unexpectedly flipping to Democrats as well.
Well, when we come back, Chris, I know you've got some numbers on how many people are perhaps not as identifying as much as MAGA. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we come back after these messages.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My guests are Chris Nichols with Eagle Consulting and JJ Abbott with Commonwealth Communications. So, Chris, we were talking before we left. JJ was talking a little bit about the, Make America Great, the MAGA side, and you just came out with some numbers that show there are, in the poll you did, or the poll you saw, I don't know whether it was yours or not, fewer are identifying as what we would call MAGA than before. Is that correct?
In the most recent issue of my PA Political Digest newsletter, I found a poll, not one I did, but by a reputable pollster. On the Republican side, one of the questions we ask is, do you consider yourself more of a MAGA Republican or more of a traditional Republican? And in the last couple of years, it's been 60-40 MAGA, something like that. Just since the spring of 2025 through the end of 2025, it collapsed down to 50-50. So 50% of Republicans saying they're MAGA types and 50% saying they're traditional types.
Okay.
So we're going to see here, President Trump is term limited, and at some point, incumbent presidents in their second term kind of become lame ducks. It happens differently on the political side than on the legislative side. So now we're all waiting to see how that works with Trump.
Are we there now? Is now being MAGA more of a liability than it's worth, perhaps?
I think we're definitely seeing a shift. I think the kids may say that, like, President Trump has lost his riz. He just sort of doesn't have the same luster, the same charisma that he had before. And I think what you're seeing with, like, someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't like this, like, great coming to sort of a different perspective, but rather like trying to get ahead of the curve. We just saw two major breaks with the president on the legislative side, both on the Epstein files and on these ACA tax credits. And so
Republican congressmen in Pennsylvania were somewhat the catalyst for that.
Indeed, and then you sort of saw in the rally that he had here that I think there's a lack of confidence that's happening right now too in his ability to go out and really meet the moment that he's in. He's telling people affordability is a hoax. He's kind of engaging in the greatest hits, but they're just not really having the same effect on people. And so I think people are looking for him to sort of meet the moment that he was elected to meet, largely on the economy. His numbers on immigration are really fading as these sort of like mass deportation efforts sort of don't look as, I think, as organized or however people were expecting them. And so I think there is this shift that's happening. It started with like the Rand Pauls and the Thomas Masseys, but now some of his most loyal people are trying to create separation between themselves and his brand.
And luckily for the GOP, the Democratic Party's reputation is in tatters. The most recent polling at the end of 25 said that only 19% of voters had a favorable impression of the Democratic Party. So when those are the two options, you can see why some people are frustrated.
Well, that leads into my next question, which is, in many cases, some of the MAGA folks want to go even more what I'll call populist and not traditional conservative Republican side, and you've got the same issue with progressives. To a certain degree, we've always had those factions within a party, but they seem more pronounced now. Are both parties kind of irretrievably broken?
I wouldn't say broken. I would say searching. There is no leader of the Democratic Party. That's not uncommon when they're the out of power party, but you've got all those different AOCs, Gavin Newsom, our Governor Shapiro, jockeying to lead that. You've got the Republicans trying to figure out what's happening with the MAGA movement and the president. So there's a lot of uncertainty in our polity right now. Usually there's one party in uncertainty. Now we have both.
Yeah.
I think what I would say one of the problems for Republicans is that their policy agenda is really difficult to be populist. It's just not really an agenda that tackles a wide range of people's problems in terms of, at least not in recent times, in terms of the legislation they passed. And so I think what we're seeing right now is they ran on this idea that they were going to lower prices, they were going to address the cost of living, and that is not how the agenda has sort of come together and what they've actually been able to do. And I think they're struggling right now to even figure out how they meet that promise that they made, which was a populist one, that they were going to be the ones that took on the big bad guys in the economy and made it better for people. And that's just really not what's happening. You have a president's embraced big tech after years of conservatives attacking them. It's just one example, I think, of where the public is seeing sort of this sheen fall off because it's hard for them to actually maneuver into the promises that they make.
All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to drill a little more down into some Pennsylvania-specific questions, and we'll do that when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, visit crossstate.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My guests are JJ Abbott and Chris Nichols. So, JJ, let me go back to you. Earlier, we had mentioned about Pennsylvania's governor, Josh Shapiro, of course, and you worked for the most immediate past governor, who also happened to be a Democrat. So right now his ratings look pretty good. How secure is he in his race for re-election in 2026?
Well, I think if you were a betting person, you would want to take the bet on him at the moment. I think he has built, obviously, a really strong profile. I think despite an intensely divided state government, he has some pretty clear accomplishments, like some of the tax credits that he's lost, which I think are tax credits that he's signed into law that I think are really good case to make for addressing the affordability crisis, which is likely going to be the biggest issue in the election. And he's going to, I think, probably show this year in 2026 that early in this year that he's got a tremendous campaign behind him as well in terms of resources. And, it sounds like he is, going to be really aggressive in running no matter how his challenger turns out, who I think has some real challenges in order to be able to build up the same kind of strength that he has. So I think going, in 2026, like the start of this year, he's the guy I would bet on. But obviously campaigns can change a lot.
Let's talk about his challenger. His challenger is State Treasurer Stacey Garrity. She's announced that she's running, and then of course Senator Doug Mastriano, who ran the last time, has said he may or may not run. So how much should Governor Shapiro fear from that development, from both of those developments?
Our last two gubernatorial nominees for the GOP have been state senators, and that's fine. Now our endorsed candidate, Stacey Garrity, is a two-time statewide office holder. In 2020, she beat a self-funding Democratic incumbent treasurer who outspent her 10-1, and she won. In 2024, she got almost as many votes as Donald Trump, even though 140,000 fewer people voted in the race for treasurer than for president. Republicans are enthused about her. Josh Shapiro's biggest opponent is Josh Shapiro. He has to kind of thread this needle about running for re-election while actually basically running for president. That's going to cause him some troubles. He's had some stumbles with a sexual harassment case in his administration that they poorly handled, and I think that's going to come back to get him. JJ's right, though. Most incumbents win, but the election's not, in January. We got 10, 11 months to go.
So you've hinted, more than hinted, that if he is successful, he is a candidate. And of course, then you hear a lot of discussion national level that Governor Shapiro is a candidate for president in 2028. Does he have to win big next year, or just win in order to stay in that conversation?
I think if you know Josh Shapiro, he wants to win big no matter what. And I think that he will put in the effort to do so. I think one of the reasons why he was so successful in 2022 and won by such a big margin is that they never conceded for a second, that even when their opponent was incredibly weak, that they had to run a really strong effort. And so he is a very competitive person. I'm sure he's going to try very hard to win. And I think some of these criticisms that, I think a lot of the criticisms of him from the Republicans so far are a lot of projection as well. I mean, Garrity basically ran in 2020 on the idea that her opponent was going to get reelected treasurer, and then immediately run for governor, and that meant that people shouldn't vote for him. And now she's doing the exact same thing right now. And I think that she has a lot of she's very unvetted as well. Those races were not intensely focused on her. She's going to have to deal with a post-primary environment that's likely going to be very difficult and very intense in trying to define her. And we'll see how that.
Well, we got to cut away. When we come back, let's talk. I want to talk about your predictions on state house and state senate races, because they're both close. So we'll do that when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're back with our guests, Chris Nichols and JJ Abbott, talking about all things politics. So, 2026, State House and Senate up. House is a one-vote margin. State Senate is 27-23. So, you guys tell me, where does all that shake out next year? You have to look forward almost a year.
Well, yeah. So I think the easiest thing to predict is that the Republicans hold the Senate. They've held it essentially since the 70s. I don't see the Democrats' path to a majority. I see some competitive races, but I'd give the Republicans the edge. In the State House, remember, each State House district is 1/2 of 1% of the state's population. In 2024, they ran the whole cycle. It was 102, 101 Democrats when you started. That's where it was when you get to the end. So I'm going to hedge a bit on the State House because we're only just now starting to see incumbents announce if they're going to stay or not.
Yeah,
we didn't have a lot of retirements in 2024. I think we're going to see a kind of built-up, demand for retirement. So,
JJ, where do you see this heading?
I'm a little bullish on the Senate and the Democrats taking it. I think the one really big advantage the Democrats have is the nesting of the districts within the congressional districts. So we're going to have a big war that's happening in Pennsylvania on the eastern third, which is, you have state Senate district in NEPA where you have a big congressional race, state Senate district in Lehigh Valley, big congressional race, state Senate district in Bucks County and Montgomery County where you're going to have a big congressional district. And so if the environment is really favorable to Democrats, plus, you have a really heavy investment in those areas, and if Trump's numbers continue to lag significantly and maybe even get worse, I think that creates an environment where, similarly to this year in 2025, you could see a turnout surge for Democrats, a persuasion surge of getting those independents, and maybe they can win up and down the ballot. I think it's too close. I think I agree with Chris that the most likely scenario is that Republicans have a small advantage, but I do think it's the first cycle in a while where it seems like it could be possible.
Well, let's also move a little bit, and thanks for that, to what I think is one of the most interesting stories, not only in Pennsylvania, it involves a Pennsylvanian, but also nationally, which is Pennsylvania's now senior U.S. Senator John Fetterman. He has certainly voted differently, I think, than Democrats thought that he would. He's been a strong pro-Israel, strong supporter of Israel. He visited with Trump at Mar-a-Lago and has gave what I think is, hey, he's the president. I should hear what he has to say. I get that. So is it a certainty that he will have a primary opponent next time?
I think so. Democrats have a real problem with their younger voters. They don't like Israel at all. That's where a lot of this back and forth with Fetterman has started. So I think you would have today probably at least 3 Democratic House members or former House members that will want to try and move up and take on Fetterman. The other question is, I don't think we're all quite sure if he's going to stand for re-election. Sometimes his comments lead you to think yes. Sometimes his comments lead you to say no. So 2028, it's a long time.
It is a long time to go. But, I mean, how do you feel about that? Is it likely he gets primary?
Yes, I think it is likely. I think what's interesting that's happening is he's made his biggest issue Israel, and when you look at the polling on that issue, and it's actually now like he's at odds with really all 3 parties in some ways on that. And you're now seeing pretty much a big divide that's happening within the Republican, particularly within MAGA, around around support for Israel. And so I think the problem for him is that he's really staked this out as like his thing that he is focused on, and I think it's at odds with him being focused on Pennsylvania. And if that's not a huge issue in 2028, and it's not. If he's at odds with a huge swath of the electorate, I think he's going to have a really hard time finding positioning because he's really lost a lot of support from Democrats and independents over the last year.
Who do you see? I mean, who were I'll go right to you in a minute, but who would you see as a candidate? So let me ask both of you a question. It's kind of a curveball. Let's say Governor Shapiro decides that the presidency hasn't worked out. Does he run in the primary against Fetterman? They're not the best of friends.
They can't stand each other. They're culturally different. They're from different parts of the state. My thing with Fetterman is if there's 2 or 3 anti-Fettermans in a Democratic primary, does that then allow him to take his 35 or 40% of the vote and sneak through the primary?
I think the great irony of this is that John Fetterman was elected lieutenant governor into statewide election running against a troubled Democrat who had lost support from his party, and it is likely he will be in a similar position in 10 years later in 2028, where he is going to have to make a decision similarly to Lieutenant Governor Stack to whether he's going to run at all. And I think that primary is an example of there were a bunch of different and pretty strong candidates in that race as well. And because the incumbent was so unpopular among his own party and had all these issues and didn't have support from the party and institutions, he wasn't able to pull it off.
All right, real quick, because we're just about done. The biggest surprise that you would predict for 2026, and you can't say a late state budget, real quick, just in 3 words.
I think all 4 hot congressional seats in Pennsylvania stay Republican. Districts 1, 7, 8, and 10.
All right, good.
I think we run the table, and Doug Mastriano runs for governor.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Hey, guys, thanks for being on. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks for coming on and watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.